Welcome to our deep dive today.
Right.
We're going to be cracking open a criminal psychology textbook.
Cool.
It explores aggression, antisocial behavior, and even some profiling techniques.
Nice.
So this textbook was originally written in Spanish,
Okay.
and it's basically a compilation of university lectures and course notes
Interesting.
from 2012 to 2013.
Gotcha.
And today our mission is to basically distill the core concepts
Right.
and highlight some of the most intriguing details.
I like it. Sounds good. So where should we start?
Well, in everyday conversation,
Yeah.
we often use terms like aggression and antisocial behavior almost interchangeably.
Uh-huh.
But the textbook really emphasizes that there are some subtle but important differences between those terms.
I see. Like what?
Well, for example,
Yeah.
you wouldn't really label a passionate debate as aggression, right?
Right.
Even though there might be like really strong opposing viewpoints.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not just about disagreeing. It's something a little bit more than that.
I see what you mean. Yeah, that makes sense. The textbook actually dives into the etymology of the word aggression.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. It traces it back to the Latin ad gradi,
Okay.
which means literally to go against or to challenge.
Okay.
So it's more about this deliberate act of, opposition or resistance.
Yeah.
But not always with the intent to cause harm.
Okay.
Like for instance, a doctor performing surgery,
Yeah.
they're kind of going against the disease, right?
Yeah.
But their intent is to help.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So aggression isn't inherently a bad thing. It really depends on the context and the intention behind it.
So it sounds like it's more about the intent then.
Yeah. It's like, are you aiming to harm or are you aiming to help?
Gotcha. So the textbook also distinguishes between antisocial behavior and criminal offenses, right?
Exactly.
Are those like synonyms or?
Well, not quite.
Yeah.
The text explains that all criminal behavior is inherently antisocial,
Okay.
but not all antisocial behavior is criminal.
Huh. Okay, so could you give me an example?
Yeah, for sure. Think of it like a Venn diagram,
Okay.
right? You have this big circle, and that's antisocial behavior.
Uh-huh.
And there's a smaller circle within that,
Yeah.
and that's criminal offenses.
So criminal behavior is just one type of antisocial behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Criminal behavior kind of crosses the line.
Okay.
It violates laws, it violates societal norms.
So it breaks those like formally established boundaries?
Precisely. It's like stepping outside those lines that society has drawn.
That's a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah.
But what exactly defines something as antisocial behavior then?
So the textbook lays out 5 key characteristics to look for.
Okay, let's hear it.
All right. So we have temporal and intersituational stability,
Okay.
evolution,
Okay.
low self-control,
Okay.
early establishment,
Okay.
and family influence.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
So, let's break it down then.
Okay.
Starting with temporal and intersituational stability.
Okay, so that just means these behaviors, they're consistent
Okay.
across different situations and over time,
Okay. Well,
So it's not just a one-time thing.
yeah.
It's a persistent pattern.
Gotcha.
Like imagine someone who always cuts lines
Yeah.
and ignores social cues
Uh-huh.
about taking turns.
Oh, yeah.
If they do this at the grocery store,
Yeah.
in traffic, at work, anywhere,
Yeah.
that shows that consistency.
So it's not just a bad habit. It's like
Right.
a deeper pattern.
Exactly. It's ingrained.
Okay. And that brings us to evolution, right?
Right. So the text explains that those ingrained patterns
Uh-huh.
can escalate over time.
Okay.
Right.
So they get worse.
Well, they can.
Mm-hmm.
They might go from habits to stable personality traits.
Oh, wow.
And in extreme cases,
Yeah.
this can even lead to a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder.
So what starts as like a minor annoyance
Right.
becomes something much more serious.
Exactly. It's like a snowball effect.
Okay, that's kind of scary. So the earlier these patterns emerge, the worse it is.
Yeah, that's where early establishment comes in.
Okay.
The text emphasizes that antisocial behaviors often show up during childhood or adolescence.
Okay.
So think of a kid who's always bullying others
Yeah.
or lying constantly,
Uh-huh.
disregarding rules.
Yeah.
Those early signs could be red flags.
It's like catching it early before it takes root then.
Exactly. Early intervention is key.
Okay, so what about family influence then?
Okay, so the textbook highlights how important family dynamics are.
Okay.
Growing up in a family where there's conflict,
Yeah.
neglect, abuse, any of that,
Uh-huh.
it can really contribute to antisocial tendencies.
It's like they learn it by example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The child is constantly exposed to aggression, to instability, to a lack of empathy at home.
Yeah.
That's what they learn to model.
So the family environment can really set the stage.
It's a huge factor for sure.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've covered consistency, escalation, early signs, family. What's the last characteristic?
Oh, right. The last one is low self-control.
Okay.
So people with antisocial tendencies, they often have trouble controlling their impulses.
Oh.
They struggle to delay gratification.
They want it all now.
Yeah, basically. They act without thinking about the consequences
Yeah.
and prioritize their own desires above all else.
That sounds familiar.
Right? It's like they're lacking that internal brake,
Uh-huh.
to regulate their behavior
Yeah.
and make responsible choices.
Okay, so it's like that impulsivity combined with the other four
Right.
creates like the perfect recipe for disaster.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes.
It can be a dangerous combination.
Okay, so we've talked about aggression and antisocial behavior. Now I want to switch gears a bit
Okay, sure.
and talk about how psychologists actually try to understand the criminal mind
Yeah.
through something called profiling.
Profiling. That's always fascinating.
Right. It sounds like something out of like a TV show, right?
Definitely.
So the textbook mentions two main approaches to profiling.
Okay.
The FBI model and the Cantor model.
Right. Those are the big ones.
Let's start with the FBI model.
Okay.
So it focuses on classifying offenders
Yeah.
as either organized or disorganized
Okay.
based on their behavior at the crime scene.
Uh-huh.
So I'm guessing a meticulously planned crime scene with little evidence left behind would point to an organized offender.
Precisely. That's the idea. It suggests a high degree of control
Okay.
and premeditation.
Yeah.
Whereas a chaotic scene with, impulsive actions
Mm-hmm.
might suggest a disorganized offender.
So it's about the level of planning involved.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine a crime scene where the victim is deliberately posed.
Oh, wow.
The weapon's gone. No signs of struggle.
Uh-huh.
That points to organization,
Okay.
right? But on the other hand, if you have a scene with the weapon still there,
Yeah.
signs of a struggle,
Uh-huh.
no attempt to hide the body,
I
that
get
could
it.
point to a more disorganized, impulsive offender.
So those little details can tell a lot.
Oh, absolutely. They can be incredibly revealing.
But the textbook says this model isn't perfect, right?
Yeah, it's important to remember
Right.
that these classifications are just tools,
Uh-huh.
not foolproof guarantees.
So we shouldn't take them as like absolute truth.
Right. They're starting points, not ending points.
Gotcha. They help to kind of guide the investigation.
Exactly. They give investigators a framework to work with.
Okay. And the Cantor model.
So the Cantor model, it takes a broader approach.
Okay.
It really focuses on the psychological and social characteristics of the offender.
Okay.
It goes beyond just the crime scene details
Uh-huh.
and considers their relationship with the victim,
Okay.
social context, their motivation, all of that.
So it's about like the bigger picture.
Exactly. It's a more nuanced approach,
Yeah.
recognizing that human behavior is complex.
So both models can be useful.
Absolutely.
But it's important to remember that they're just tools, not crystal balls.
Precisely. They can provide insights, but they don't tell the whole story.
Gotcha. So we've covered aggression, antisocial behavior, profiling.
Uh-huh.
Now let's talk about a topic that always seems to capture people's attention.
Okay, what's that?
Serial killers.
Ah, yes. A chilling subject, but a fascinating one for sure.
So the text makes this clear distinction
Okay.
between single or occasional murderers
Uh-huh.
and multiple murderers.
Right, so those who kill more than one person.
Exactly. So serial killers fall under the umbrella of multiple murderers.
Right.
But there are actually other types of multiple murderers as well.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
So there are spree killers, serial killers, and mass murderers.
Okay, let's break those down.
So spree killings involve a spree of homicides
Okay.
within a short period of time.
Uh-huh.
So it's like a burst of violence
Okay.
over a very specific time frame.
So it's concentrated then.
Exactly.
Well,
Often driven by a single motive, like revenge.
Uh-huh.
And they might involve moving from one location to another as the killer pursues different targets.
Gotcha. It's like they're on a mission.
Exactly. And then you have serial killings, which are kind of spread out over time
Okay.
with that cooling off period between the killings.
Mm-hmm.
And the connection between the victims might only exist in the killer's mind.
That's chilling.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have mass murderers, which are sadly becoming more and more common in our society.
Yeah, it's a disturbing trend.
And those individuals target multiple victims in a single event,
Okay.
often in a public place.
Right. Like we see with mass shootings
Exactly.
and terrorist attacks.
Yeah. So it's important to distinguish these different types of multiple murders.
Yeah, I can see how that would be crucial for investigations.
Because it can give us clues about their motivations and their behavior patterns.
Makes sense. So speaking of motivations, what drives these serial killers to commit such awful acts?
That's a great question. The textbook outlines 3 primary motives for serial killers:
Okay, I'm listening.
revenge and justification,
Okay.
control and power,
Uh-huh.
and ecstasy relief.
Ecstasy relief. That's an interesting term.
Yeah, it refers to a combination of rage and euphoria,
Okay.
followed by a sense of calm and relief after the kill.
Wow, that's disturbing. So let's break these motives down. What does revenge and justification mean in this context?
So imagine someone who feels incredibly wronged.
Okay.
Maybe they've experienced a deep injustice,
Uh-huh.
and they're harboring this intense resentment or desire for payback.
Right, like they're seeking retribution.
They might target individuals they blame for their suffering,
Okay.
and they might even rationalize their actions, convincing themselves that their victims somehow deserve it.
It's a twisted sense of justice.
Exactly.
Okay. What about control and power? What does that look like?
So these individuals, they crave dominance and control.
Okay.
And they get this, like, perverse sense of power from taking a life.
It's like they're playing God.
Yeah, it's a really disturbing manifestation of their need for power over others.
Makes sense. And then there's that ecstasy relief motive. Can you elaborate on that a little?
So these individuals actually experience a surge of adrenaline,
Okay.
a sense of euphoria, or even sexual gratification during the act of killing.
That's really hard to
I
comprehend.
know, it's a very disturbing concept.
Yeah, it is. So by exploring these motives, we can get a glimpse into their minds.
Yeah, but it's like piecing together a puzzle where the pieces are all warped and distorted.
That's a great way to put it. So are there different types of serial killers, like different psychological profiles?
That's another thing the textbook delves into.
Okay, tell me more.
It outlines different typologies of serial killers.
Oh, wow. Like what?
So there are visionary killers,
Okay.
missionary killers,
Uh-huh.
hedonistic killers,
Okay.
and power control killers.
Okay, so 4 main types.
Yeah.
Let's break those down one by one. What characterizes a visionary serial killer?
So imagine someone driven by hallucinations, delusions, or a break from reality.
Okay, so their grip on reality is tenuous.
Exactly.
Right.
Their crimes often appear chaotic and disorganized,
Uh-huh.
fueled by internal voices or visions.
So they're not necessarily acting rationally.
Right.
Okay, got it. What about missionary serial killers? What sets them apart?
So these killers feel this compulsion to eliminate a specific group of people
Okay.
that they perceive as undesirable or a threat to society.
Like they're on a crusade.
Yeah, but their ideology is completely warped and dangerous, obviously.
So they might target, for example, prostitutes or drug addicts.
Exactly, or members of a certain religious group or ethnic group.
It's frightening how they can justify such horrific acts.
Okay, so we've got visionary and missionary. What about hedonistic serial killers?
So as the name suggests, they're driven by pleasure and gratification.
Okay.
They derive enjoyment, excitement, sometimes even sexual arousal from the act of killing. Wow, that's disturbing. It's like they're getting a high from the violence.
Right, and this category can be further divided into those who seek lust, thrill, or even profit from their crimes.
So there are subcategories within the hedonistic type.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm following. And what about the last type? Power control killers.
So, as you might guess, these killers are obsessed with dominating and controlling their victims.
Okay.
They often meticulously plan their crimes, they select vulnerable targets, and they exert this complete control over every aspect of the interaction.
So it's all about power and dominance for them.
Precisely. They might tie up their victims, subdue them, prolong their suffering.
It's a horrifying thought.
Yeah, it's a really disturbing manifestation of a need for control taken to a dangerous extreme.
Okay, so we've got visionary, missionary, hedonistic, and power control. 4 very distinct types.
And it's important to note that these categories aren't always mutually exclusive.
Right, I was just thinking that. There could be overlap between the types.
Exactly. A single killer might exhibit characteristics of multiple types.
Makes sense. So it's more like a spectrum than rigid category.
Exactly, but understanding these different types can still be really helpful.
Yeah, I can see how it would be useful in investigations and trying to predict your behavior.
It's like having a toolkit for understanding the criminal mind, but the tools are always evolving and the puzzle never quite fits together perfectly.
That's a great analogy.
Because the human mind, especially a criminal mind, can be incredibly complex and unpredictable.
It's a constant challenge to try to understand those dark corners of the human psyche.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of aggression, antisocial behavior, and these two main profiling approaches. Now, I want to dive into a particularly captivating topic:
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
serial killers.
Ah, yes. They've always held a morbid fascination for the public, and they represent a real challenge for criminal psychologists.
So, to start off, the text makes a clear distinction between single or occasional murderers who commit a single act of homicide and multiple murderers who, as the name suggests, take the lives of at least two victims.
Okay, so serial killers fall under the umbrella of multiple murderers.
Exactly, but it's important to remember that there are other types of multiple murderers as well.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
So there are spree killers, serial killers, and mass murderers.
Okay, let's break those down. I'm not really familiar with the distinctions between them.
Sure. Spree killings, as the name implies, involve a spree of homicides that occur within a relatively short time frame, often driven by a single motive, like revenge. And they might involve geographic movement as the killer travels from one target to the next.
So it's like a burst of violence over a limited period, often fueled by a very specific goal.
Precisely. Now, in contrast to spree killings, serial killings are marked by a cooling off period between homicides. The killings are spread out over time, and the connection between the victims often exists primarily in the killer's mind.
So the connection between the victims might be completely invisible to everyone except the killer themselves.
That's what makes them so chilling.
Yeah, it's a terrifying thought. And what about mass murderers? What distinguishes them from the other two categories?
Mass murderers target multiple victims in a single event, often in a public place. Think of tragedies like school shootings or terrorist attacks, those horrifying acts of violence with devastating consequences.
It's heartbreaking to see how these types of killings seem to be on the rise. It makes you wonder what's fueling this trend.
It's definitely a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah, I agree. But understanding the distinctions between these different types of multiple murderers can help us to develop more effective investigative strategies.
Exactly, and it can give us insights into the underlying motivations that drive these individuals to commit such horrific acts.
Right, because those motivations can vary widely, from revenge to a desire for power and control to even a twisted sense of pleasure or gratification from the act of killing itself.
You're hitting on a key point there. The text actually delves into the psychology of serial killers, outlining those primary motives we just talked about: revenge and justification, control and power, and what they call ecstasy relief.
Ecstasy relief. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, it's a term used to describe the psychological experience of some serial killers who feel a combination of rage and euphoria during the act of killing, followed by a sense of calm and relief afterwards.
It's a disturbing thought that someone could derive pleasure from such a horrific act.
It is. But exploring these motives can give us clues about what drives them, helping us to understand the twisted logic that fuels their actions.
Right, because their minds work very differently from ours.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the three main motives. Now I'm curious about the different types of serial killers.
Yeah, the text also goes into that.
Okay, cool.
It outlines different typologies of serial killers, suggesting that there are distinct psychological profiles that can help us to understand their behavior and potentially predict their next moves.
That sounds really helpful for investigators. So what are these different typologies?
So the text outlines 4 primary typologies: visionary, missionary, hedonistic, and power control.
Okay, 4 distinct types. Let's break those down. What characterizes a visionary serial killer?
So imagine someone driven by hallucinations, delusions, or a profound break from reality. Their crimes might appear chaotic and disorganized, fueled by internal voices or visions that compel them to kill.
So they might believe they're on a divine mission or that they're ridding the world of evil, even if their victims seem random and unconnected to us.
Exactly. Their internal reality dictates their actions, and those actions often seem senseless and unpredictable to the outside observer.
That's chilling. It's like they're operating at a completely different wavelength. Yeah. Okay, what about missionary serial killers? What motivates them?
Missionary killers, as the name suggests, feel this compulsion to eliminate a specific group of people they perceive as undesirable or a threat to society.
So they might target, for example, prostitutes or drug addicts.
Yeah. Exactly, or members of a certain religious group or ethnic group. They might believe they're doing society a favor, but their actions are horrific and completely unjustified.
It's a terrifying thought. Okay, what about hedonistic serial killers? What drives them?
Hedonistic killers, as you might guess, are driven by pleasure and gratification.
Oh, wow.
They derive a sense of enjoyment, excitement, or even sexual arousal from the act of killing itself.
That's really disturbing. It's like they're getting a high from the violence, feeding some dark and twisted appetite.
You're right, and this category can be further divided into those who seek lust, thrill, or even profit from their crimes.
So there are subcategories within the hedonistic type.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm following. What about the last category, power control serial killers?
Power control killers are obsessed with dominating and controlling their victims. They might meticulously plan their crimes, selecting vulnerable targets, and exerting complete control over every aspect of the interaction. They might tie up their victims, subdue them, or prolong their suffering, reveling in their absolute power over life and death.
It's like they're playing a twisted game where they're the puppet master and their victims are the helpless puppets. It's a truly disturbing thought.
It is. And again, it's important to remember that these typologies aren't always clear-cut.
Right, there could be some overlap.
There can be overlaps.
Yeah.
And a single killer might exhibit characteristics of multiple types.
Yeah.
But understanding these categories can still help us analyze their behavior, predict their actions, and potentially prevent future crimes.
It's like having a set of lenses to view their behavior through, right?
Right.
Each lens reveals a different aspect of their psyche.
That's a great way to put it. It helps us to understand the criminal mind, but we have to remember that it's a constantly evolving puzzle.
Yeah, it's a puzzle with many missing pieces, and the pieces we do have don't always fit neatly together. But the more pieces we find, the closer we get to understanding the bigger picture.
Exactly. And the more we understand, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and our communities from those who would do us harm.
Right, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to understanding and preventing crime.
Okay, so we've covered aggression, antisocial behavior, profiling, and even delved into the chilling world of serial killers and their motives.
It's been a fascinating, albeit disturbing, journey so far.
Now I want to shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about a topic that can be difficult to discuss, but it's incredibly important to address.
Okay, I'm ready. What is it?
Sexual assault.
Okay, yeah. That's a tough subject, but a necessary one to talk about for sure.
So the text dispels this common misconception
Okay.
that all sex offenders were themselves victims of abuse.
Right, because it's easy to fall into that trap of thinking that their behavior is simply a result of their own past trauma.
Yeah, but it's not always a simple cause and effect relationship.
It's more complex than that.
Yeah, much more.
Okay.
Well, there might be a correlation like, a higher prevalence of abuse histories among sex offenders compared to the general population.
Right.
Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Of course.
And the text really emphasizes that point.
All right.
There are many factors that contribute to the development of sexually offensive behavior.
Makes sense.
And it's very rarely a single straightforward path.
Right, so it's not like you can just point to one event or experience and say, that's why they became an offender.
Exactly.
Okay, so what are some of the psychological factors that might play a role then?
So the textbook highlights a few key areas that often come up
Okay.
in evaluations of sex offenders. And one of the big ones is cognitive distortions.
Cognitive distortions. Can you explain what those are?
Yeah, so cognitive distortions are basically ways of thinking
Okay.
that are irrational or inaccurate,
Uh-huh.
and they can lead people to perceive situations
Yeah.
in a very distorted way,
Okay.
often justifying or minimizing their own actions.
So it's like they're twisting reality to fit their own narrative.
Yeah, for instance, a sex offender might convince themselves that the victim was asking for it
Right.
or that they enjoyed the encounter.
Wow. That's a pretty disturbing way to rationalize such behavior.
Yeah, and these cognitive distortions become like a defense mechanism,
Okay.
allowing them to maintain that sense of self-justification and avoid facing the reality of their actions.
It's like they're building a wall of denial around themselves.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What are some of the other factors mentioned in the text?
So another key area is emotional regulation, or really the lack thereof.
Okay.
Many sex offenders struggle to manage their emotions.
So they might be easily overwhelmed by anger, frustration, or even their own sexual urges.
Exactly, leading
Okay.
to impulsive and destructive behavior.
It's like they don't have that internal brake to control those impulses.
Right, and this lack of emotional control can be made even worse by substance abuse,
Hmm.
stress, or other environmental triggers.
It's like a perfect storm of internal vulnerabilities and external pressures that can push them over the edge.
And then there's the issue of empathy,
Okay.
which the text points out is often lacking.
Right. So they struggle to understand and share the feelings of others, especially their victims.
Exactly. They might lack the capacity to recognize the pain,
Yeah.
fear, and trauma that they inflict.
It's like they dehumanize their victims, making it easier to commit those acts without feeling remorse.
You're right. It's like they create this distance between themselves and the consequences of their actions.
So when you combine those factors, the cognitive distortions, the emotional dysregulation, and the lack of empathy,
Yeah.
you can see how it creates a dangerous psychological cocktail.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that the human mind can be capable of both incredible compassion
Yeah.
and unimaginable cruelty.
It's a chilling thought, but it's important to acknowledge that dark side of human nature.
Absolutely. And understanding those factors can help us to develop more effective interventions and prevention strategies.
Okay, so we've covered some general factors that contribute to sexually offensive behavior. Now, I'm curious about the characteristics of those who specifically target children.
Yeah, so the text actually distinguishes between two types of pedophiles:
Okay.
primary pedophiles
Uh-huh.
and secondary pedophiles.
I'm not familiar with that distinction. Can you explain the difference?
Sure. So primary pedophiles, they have a long-standing
Okay.
and exclusive sexual attraction to children.
Okay.
Their entire sexual identity revolves around this deviant interest.
So it's not just a phase or a situational thing. It's a fundamental part of who they are. Host speaker. It's a deeply ingrained part of their sexual orientation.
Exactly. Secondary pedophiles, on the other hand, develop an interest in children later in life,
Okay.
often as a result of external factors.
About what?
Things like relationship problems,
Uh-huh.
alcohol abuse, or even a loss of access to adult partners.
So it's more situational than a core element
Mhm.
of their sexual identity.
Right.
Okay.
It's really important to understand those differences
Yeah.
for assessment and treatment.
Makes sense. You need to know what you're dealing with to tailor the treatment effectively.
Exactly.
So the text talks about the challenges of evaluating these individuals, right?
Right, evaluating sex offenders.
Yeah.
It presents some really unique obstacles.
Yeah. I bet. I mean, it's not like they're going to be completely open and honest about their behaviors.
Exactly. Unlike other psychological assessments,
Yeah.
there's a really strong incentive for these individuals to lie,
Yeah.
to minimize their behavior,
Uh-huh.
to present themselves in the most favorable light possible.
Right. Especially if it could affect their legal situation.
Exactly. So psychologists have to be really skilled
Yeah. I can imagine that takes a lot of training.
in detecting deception.
Uh-huh.
And they use all sorts of techniques, like analyzing body language,
Okay.
looking for inconsistencies in their stories, even paying attention to like subtle linguistic cues.
It sounds like a real-life detective game, piecing together the clues to figure out if they're being truthful.
You're right, and the stakes are incredibly high
Yeah.
because the outcome of these assessments can impact things like sentencing,
That's
treatment options, and the safety of potential future victims.
It's a heavy responsibility, but a crucial one for protecting society and making sure justice is served.
And that leads us to another really critical area of forensic psychology:
Okay, what's that?
eyewitness testimony.
Eyewitness testimony. It seems so straightforward on the surface, but I bet it's more complicated than we think.
Yeah, you're right. It can be incredibly valuable,
Uh-huh.
but it's not foolproof.
Right.
And the text really dives into how complex memory is and how it's not this perfect recording of events.
It's more like a reconstruction.
Yeah, and our memories are surprisingly fragile.
Fragile. What do you mean?
Well, they can be easily influenced by a bunch of different factors.
Okay, so like what kind of factors can affect how accurately we remember things?
Well, first, there are the conditions during the event itself.
Okay.
Like the lighting, the distance, was there a weapon present, all that.
Right, because those things can all impact what we actually encode into our memories in the first place?
Exactly. And then the emotional state of the witness is super important too.
Okay.
When we're under stress or experiencing intense emotions, our attention can narrow and we might miss important details.
That makes sense. Our brains kind of go into survival mode and prioritize the most threatening information.
Right.
Okay.
The text actually mentions something called weapon focus.
Weapon focus. I haven't heard of that. What is it?
So imagine you're witnessing a robbery,
Yeah.
and the robber pulls out a gun.
Yeah.
Naturally, your attention is drawn to the gun, right?
Of course.
It's a threat.
Yeah.
And our brains are kind of wired to focus on threats.
Okay.
But as a result, you might miss other crucial details
Oh, okay.
about the robber,
Yeah.
their appearance, their clothing, because you're so fixated on the weapon.
So it's like our brains are prioritizing the most immediate danger and filtering out other information that might be important later.
You got it.
Okay, that makes sense. So the conditions during the event itself can affect what we remember, but what about afterwards? Can our memories be influenced even after a crime has occurred?
Absolutely. The way questions are asked during witness interviews is super important.
Okay.
Because leading questions,
Yeah.
which suggest a specific answer or detail, can actually contaminate a witness's memory.
Can you give me an example of a leading question?
Sure. So instead of asking, did you see a weapon?
Okay.
An investigator might ask,
Yeah.
what kind of weapon did you see?
Ah, I see. So they're already assuming that the witness saw a weapon, which could influence their recollection, even if they weren't entirely sure.
Exactly. So even those subtle cues in the way questions are phrased can shape our memories without us realizing it.
That's unsettling. It makes you wonder how many eyewitness accounts might be inaccurate or unreliable.
It's a big concern. And then you have the passage of time, which is another huge factor.
Yeah.
As time goes by, our memories naturally fade.
Yeah.
And they become less reliable.
Okay.
Details get fuzzy. We might accidentally fill in gaps with assumptions or inferences.
It's like a game of telephone, where the message gets distorted with each retelling.
Exactly. And on top of that, our personal beliefs and stereotypes can also influence our memories.
Oh, wow.
We tend to remember things in ways that align with our pre-existing views.
So our own biases can sneak into our memories without us even realizing it.
You got it.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not about dismissing eyewitness accounts altogether,
No.
but it's important to be aware of their limitations.
Exactly. We have to view them with caution and recognize that there's potential for error.
Okay, so we've covered the complexities of eyewitness testimony and the various factors that can affect its reliability. Now, I'm curious about another area that often plays a role in criminal investigations: detecting deception.
Yeah, that's a fascinating area. And it plays a crucial role in forensic psychology, especially in things like criminal investigations and legal proceedings.
Okay.
So I'm guessing it's not as easy as looking for like a shifty glance or a sweaty brow.
Right, because those can be signs of nervousness or anxiety, which aren't necessarily indicators of lying.
Exactly.
So what are some more reliable ways to detect deception?
Well, the text highlights several approaches to lie detection, including both physiological and behavioral methods.
Right, because lying often triggers physiological changes like increased heart rate or sweating.
Right. We've already talked about the polygraph, which measures those physiological responses. But while it can be a useful tool, it's not foolproof.
Right. It's not a magic bullet.
It's more of an indicator of stress or anxiety,
Okay.
which might be associated with lying, but not necessarily a direct measure of deception.
So what are some other methods that are used?
So psychologists also rely heavily on behavioral observation.
Okay.
Analyzing things like body language, facial expressions, even subtle microexpressions that might betray a lie.
Wait, microexpressions, what are those?
Yeah, so imagine like a fleeting expression that flashes across someone's face for just a fraction of a second. It might be a flicker of fear or anger or sadness that they're trying to conceal.
Oh, I see. So it's like catching a glimpse of their true emotions before they have a chance to mask them.
Exactly.
Wow, that's fascinating.
They're hard to detect with the naked eye, but they can be super revealing.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole field dedicated to analyzing linguistic patterns, looking for inconsistencies, contradictions, specific word choices.
That might signal deception.
So it's not just about what they're saying, but how they're saying it.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the text really emphasizes that lie detection is complex.
Yeah.
It takes training and expertise to do it accurately.
Right, because you don't want to misinterpret something and accuse someone of lying when they're telling the truth.
Exactly. So it's not about spotting one, like, telltale sign, but about looking at the whole picture. Their behavior, the context of the situation, all the available evidence.
So it's like a detective putting together a puzzle, but the pieces are constantly shifting.
Yeah.
And you have to be careful not to force them into place.
That's a great analogy.
Okay, so we've talked about lie detection. Is there anything else?
Yeah, so now I want to touch on something called malingering.
Malingering. What's that?
It's basically faking a mental illness.
Oh, okay. So why would someone pretend to have a mental illness?
Well, there are a few different reasons
Okay.
in legal contexts.
It might be to avoid taking responsibility for a crime,
Okay.
to secure a lighter sentence,
Uh-huh.
or even to get access to certain benefits or treatments.
So it's a way to manipulate the system to their advantage.
Exactly.
Okay.
But sometimes it's not about legal maneuvering at all.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes it's about seeking attention,
Mm-hmm.
sympathy,
Okay.
or even escaping difficult situations.
So it's like they're putting on a performance to get what they want.
Yeah, and the challenge for psychologists
Uh-huh.
is to distinguish genuine psychological distress
Yeah.
from that calculated fakery.
That sounds really tough. How do they do that?
So it involves in-depth interviews,
Okay.
psychological testing,
Uh-huh.
behavioral observation,
Okay.
even reviewing information
Yeah.
from family and friends.
Gotcha.
So they're looking for inconsistencies, exaggerated symptoms, anything that suggests the person's presentation isn't quite adding up.
So it's like being a detective again, looking for clues to see if they're being genuine.
Exactly. And there are even specific tests designed to detect malingering,
Oh, wow.
like the MMPI,
Okay.
which is a widely used personality test
Uh-huh.
that has scales
Yeah.
specifically designed to identify patterns of response that are associated with faking.
So it's like a lie detector test, but for mental illness.
Kind of, and it's really important to catch those who are malingering.
Right, because it's not fair to those who genuinely need help, and it could allow someone dangerous to slip through the cracks.
Exactly, but also we don't want to misinterpret someone who's actually struggling as being a faker.
Yeah, that would be terrible. It's a delicate balance for sure.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from aggression and antisocial behavior to eyewitness testimony, lie detection, and malingering.
Uh-huh.
Now, I want to dive into an area that I think is particularly fascinating, and it's often misrepresented in popular culture.
Okay, what's that?
Psychopathy.
Ah, psychopathy. That's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but I'm not sure most people really understand what it means.
Yeah, and the text does a good job of clarifying what it is and what it isn't.
Okay, good.
So it's not just about being evil or violent.
Okay.
It's really about this specific set of personality traits
Okay.
that predispose individuals to certain behaviors.
So it's more about how their brain is wired.
Yeah, the text highlights the work of Robert Hare,
Okay.
who's a renowned expert in the field,
Uh-huh.
and he developed this checklist for assessing psychopathy
Okay.
called the PCLR.
PCLR, got it. And what does that checklist measure exactly?
So it breaks down psychopathy into two main factors:
Okay.
emotional detachment
Yeah.
and antisocial behavior.
So one factor is about their internal emotional world, and the other is about how those internal traits manifest externally.
You got it.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's start with emotional detachment. What does that look like in a psychopath?
Imagine someone who can charm and manipulate people with ease,
Uh-huh.
but they lack genuine empathy,
Yeah.
remorse, or guilt.
It's like they're wearing a mask, putting on a show to get what they want.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
They might be glib and superficial,
Uh-huh.
skilled at mimicking emotions that they don't actually feel.
So they're like chameleons, blending in and adapting to whatever situation they're in.
And then the second factor, antisocial behavior.
Okay.
That encompasses things like impulsivity,
Uh-huh.
irresponsibility,
Okay.
a parasitic lifestyle,
Yeah.
and often a history of criminal activity.
So it's not just about their emotional coldness. It's about how that translates into actions that disregard social norms and the well-being of others.
Exactly.
Okay, so not all psychopaths are criminals,
Right.
but their traits make it more likely that they will engage in criminal behavior.
Yeah, the research suggests that psychopathy is a strong predictor of recidivism.
Meaning the likelihood of reoffending.
Yeah.
That makes sense, given their lack of empathy and remorse.
Mhm.
Like they don't learn from their mistakes or feel any guilt for their actions,
And they can be incredibly convincing liars and manipulators.
which makes it difficult to assess their true intentions.
Right, because they can charm their way out of trouble or even feign rehabilitation. It's unsettling to think how easily they can fool people.
Yeah, and that raises a really important question.
Okay.
How does psychopathy relate to this legal concept of criminal responsibility?
That's a tricky one. It's a question that's been debated for years.
Yeah.
So, could psychopathy be used as a defense in court?
It's complicated. Psychopaths are often aware of their actions.
Okay.
And they understand right from wrong.
Uh-huh.
They know they're breaking the law,
Yeah.
but they just lack that emotional capacity to care.
So they know what they're doing, but they don't feel the same remorse or guilt that a neurotypical person would experience.
Exactly. So
Okay.
that makes it really difficult
Yeah.
to apply that traditional legal definition of insanity,
Uh-huh.
which hinges on the ability to distinguish right from wrong.
So if they know right from wrong, but they just don't care, does that make them legally insane? It's a gray area, but the text suggests that psychopathy on its own
Yeah.
may not qualify as legal insanity in most cases,
Right.
but it can be a mitigating factor in sentencing.
So it's like acknowledging that their brain is wired differently, which might lessen their culpability to some degree.
It's a really controversial issue.
I bet. It's a tough one to grapple with, for sure.
Okay, so we've delved into this chilling world of psychopathy and talked about its relationship to criminal behavior
Yeah.
and the legal complexities of responsibility.
It's fascinating how psychology and law intersect in these cases.
Now I want to transition to
Oh.
more practical application of psychology.
Okay, sounds good. What is it?
Psychological assessment in legal contexts.
So this is where psychology steps out of the textbook and into the courtroom.
Exactly, and it's about applying psychological principles to real-world situations
Okay.
to help inform legal decisions.
So it's not just about offering opinions, it's about providing evidence that can actually be used in court.
Precisely.
Okay.
The text outlines these key principles of forensic assessment,
Mm-hmm.
really emphasizing the importance of objectivity,
Uh-huh.
thoroughness,
Yeah.
and using reliable assessment tools.
I got to be scientifically sound, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And it's not just like any psychological evaluation.
Uh-huh.
These are really tailored
Okay.
to address really specific legal questions.
So can you give me some examples of the types of legal questions a forensic assessment might address?
Sure. So one common question is,
Yeah.
is this defendant competent to stand trial?
Competency to stand trial. What does that mean exactly?
It's basically assessing whether the defendant has the mental capacity to understand the charges against them,
Okay.
assist their attorney,
Yeah.
and rationally participate in the proceedings.
So it's not about whether they're guilty or innocent, but whether they're mentally fit to stand trial.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a crucial distinction. So it's a safeguard to protect the rights of individuals, even when they're accused of crimes.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. What happens if someone is found incompetent to stand trial?
Well, that doesn't mean that charges are dismissed.
Okay.
The proceedings might be delayed while the defendant gets treatment.
Treatment to restore their competency.
Exactly. Sometimes that can be done through things like medication,
Okay.
therapy,
Uh-huh.
or even just education about the legal process.
So it's about giving them the tools and support they need to understand and participate in their own defense.
That's the goal. But in some cases,
Yeah.
the impairment might be so severe
Mm-hmm.
or persistent
Yeah.
that the person is found permanently incompetent to stand trial.
Oh, wow. That's a tough situation. What happens then?
Well, it gets really complicated.
Yeah.
The outcome can vary depending on the jurisdiction
Uh-huh.
and the charges.
Yeah.
Sometimes the charges might be dismissed,
Yeah, okay.
or the defendant might be civilly committed to a psychiatric facility for treatment, but it's up to the court to decide the best course of action.
So it's a balancing act between protecting the individual's rights and ensuring the safety of society.
Exactly. And it highlights just how important a thorough and nuanced competency evaluation is.
Right.
We have to recognize those complexities of mental illness to make sure that the legal process is fair for everyone.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've covered competency evaluations. What's next?
So now I want to shift our focus to another stage of the criminal justice process,
Okay.
police interrogations.
Police interrogations. That's where things get really interesting. You've got the pressure, the tactics, the whole psychological game playing out.
Right, and we see it all the time in movies and TV shows,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing the reality is much more nuanced.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
real life is rarely as dramatic or clear-cut as it is on screen.
Exactly. So the text gets into the psychological tactics that are often used in interrogations,
Uh-huh.
highlighting both the potential for getting true confessions
Okay.
and the risk of false confessions.
False confessions. Why would someone confess to a crime they didn't commit?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it's something that psychologists have been trying to figure out
Uh-huh.
for decades.
Okay.
So, first of all,
Yeah.
the interrogation environment itself can be pretty intimidating.
Yeah, I can imagine. You're in a small room being questioned by authority figures. It's got to be nerve-wracking.
Exactly. And the text talks about this technique called the read technique, which is widely used in interrogations. And it involves this kind of structured approach where interrogators alternate between being accusatory and sympathetic.
So they might start by accusing the suspect directly, maybe even presenting evidence that suggests they're guilty.
Yeah, and then they'll shift to this more understanding, empathetic approach, maybe offering justifications for the suspect's actions.
So it's like they're playing good cop, bad cop, trying to break down their defenses.
Yeah, the goal is to make the suspect feel like confessing.
Is the easiest way out.
So even an innocent person might confess, just to escape the pressure.
Exactly.
Wow, that's unsettling. It makes you wonder how many people have been wrongfully convicted based on false confessions.
It's a big concern, and that's why the text emphasizes the importance of recording interrogations.
Oh.
So you have that visual and audio record to assess whether the questioning was fair and the confession was truly voluntary.
So it's about transparency and accountability.
Exactly.
Making sure the process is conducted ethically.
We have to make sure that the process is ethical
Yeah.
and the suspect's rights are being protected.
Okay, so we've talked about the psychological tactics used in interrogations, the risks of false confessions, and the importance of recording interrogations to ensure fairness and transparency. What's next?
All right, so now I want to talk about something that we often see portrayed in crime dramas.
Okay, I'm curious.
Well, criminal profiling.
Criminal profiling. It always seems so intriguing on TV, but I'm sure the reality is much more complex.
It is. It's basically about analyzing crime scenes, offender behavior, victim characteristics to try to create like a psychological sketch of the perpetrator.
So it's like putting together a puzzle, using all the pieces of information available to create a picture of the unknown offender.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
It's using psychological principles, investigative experience, to try to understand the offender's motivations, their personality traits, maybe even predict their future actions.
It sounds like a mix of science, intuition, and good old-fashioned detective work.
You got it.
Okay, so where did criminal profiling come from? How did it all begin?
Well, the text traces its roots back to those early efforts to understand serial killers.
Oh, like Jack the Ripper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like in the late 19th century, law enforcement was baffled by these brutal and seemingly random crimes.
Yeah.
So they turned to psychologists, criminologists for insight.
Makes sense. They needed a new way to understand these seemingly inexplicable acts.
Right.
Okay.
And as our understanding of psychology, criminal behavior has grown, so has the field of criminal profiling.
Okay, so what are some of the different approaches to profiling?
Well, we already talked about the FBI's disorganized typology, which is based on the crime scene, the level of planning, control.
Right, so organized offenders are meticulous planners who leave little evidence, while disorganized offenders are more impulsive and chaotic.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that this typology isn't perfect.
Of course.
It's just one tool among many.
Okay.
The text also mentions something called geographic profiling.
Geographic profiling, what's that?
So it analyzes those spatial patterns of the crimes to predict where the offender might live.
Oh, so it's like connecting the dots on a map, looking for patterns that might reveal their home base.
Yeah. And this can be really helpful for focusing resources in a specific geographic area.
Okay, that's interesting. So criminal profiling is a pretty powerful tool then.
It can be, but it's also been the subject of a lot of controversy.
Right, because it's not an exact science. There's always the potential for bias and misinterpretation.
You're right.
So it's important to use it responsibly and not rely on it as the only source of information.
Exactly. It's a tool that has to be used with caution and in conjunction with other evidence.
Okay.
So now I want to talk about a very specific type of crime
Okay.
that often involves intense negotiations and a race against time.
Okay, what is it? Sounds intense.
Hostage situation.
Hostage situation. Wow, yeah, those are definitely high-stakes events.
So what motivates someone to take hostages in the first place?
That's a good question. I'd imagine there are lots of different reasons.
Yeah, the text actually distinguishes between two main types of hostage-taking, instrumental hostage-taking and expressive hostage-taking.
Okay, I'm not familiar with those terms. Can you explain the difference?
So, in instrumental hostage-taking, the hostage is a means to an end.
Okay.
The hostage-taker has this very specific goal, like escaping,
Okay.
getting ransom money,
Yeah.
making political demands.
So the hostage is a bargaining chip, a way to leverage power to get what they want.
You got it.
Okay. And what about expressive hostage taking?
So in expressive hostage taking,
Yeah.
the main motivation is psychological. The hostage taker might be driven by things like anger, frustration, a need for attention, or even revenge.
So it's more about expressing those intense emotions or making a statement than about achieving a specific goal.
Exactly, and understanding that motivation is crucial for negotiator.
Makes sense. Knowing what's driving the hostage taker can help negotiators tailor their approach and find ways to de-escalate the situation.
Exactly, and the text also talks about the different phases of a hostage situation.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So it typically starts with the initial seizure.
Okay.
That's where the hostage taker takes control, establishes their demands.
Okay.
Then it moves to bargaining negotiation.
Yeah. Where?
Yeah.
Where trained negotiators try to, establish communication, build rapport, and hopefully bring the situation to a peaceful resolution.
Right, and that resolution can involve anything from a surrender to a tactical intervention by law enforcement, but hopefully with minimal harm to the hostages.
Of course, that's always the priority.
Yeah.
So what kind of tactics do negotiators use in those situations? I'd imagine it takes a lot of skill and patience to deal with someone who's holding hostages.
Yeah, the text talks about how important active listening is.
Okay.
Empathy.
Yeah.
Building rapport with the hostage taker.
So it's not just about demanding their surrender. It's about trying to understand where they're coming from.
Exactly.
Okay.
Negotiators really try to see things from the hostage taker's perspective, understand their motivations, their underlying needs.
It's about de-escalating the situation, right? Bringing that emotional intensity down and creating a space for dialogue.
Exactly.
Makes sense. And do they use any specific techniques to do that?
Yeah, they might use things like mirroring,
Okay.
Matching the hostage taker's language, validating their emotions, offering small concessions.
So it's a delicate dance, trying to balance firmness with empathy, recognizing that the hostage taker is often in a highly emotional and unpredictable state.
Precisely.
It's got to be a tough job.
It is. It takes a lot of training and skill
Yeah.
to be a successful hostage negotiator.
Okay, so we've covered hostage situations. What else is there?
Okay, so now I want to shift gears and talk about the aftermath of a crime.
Okay, so we're moving from the actual crime to the impact it has on those involved.
Exactly. The victims, the witnesses.
Right, because crime isn't just an abstract concept. It has real and lasting effects on people's lives.
You got it. Okay.
The text talks about PTSD.
PTSD, yeah. Post-traumatic stress disorder. That's a common reaction to experiencing or witnessing something traumatic, like a violent crime. Right, and it can manifest in a lot of different ways.
So what are some of the symptoms of PTSD?
So some people experience intrusive thoughts or memories of the event. Nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks.
Okay.
Others might feel emotionally numb, detached, unable to enjoy things that they used to.
So it can affect their emotional state as well.
Yeah. Okay.
They might avoid people, places, or even thoughts that remind them of the trauma.
Okay.
And then some people experience hypervigilance.
Hypervigilance. What's that?
So they're constantly on edge.
Okay.
Easily startled. Feeling like danger's lurking everywhere.
So it's like they're constantly in survival mode, even when they're safe.
Exactly.
Wow, that's got to be exhausting. So it can affect their thoughts, their emotions, their behaviors, even their physical well-being?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's important to remember that PTSD isn't a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's a normal reaction to an abnormal experience. It's like your body's way of trying to process and cope with something truly horrific.
Yeah.
So what kind of support is available for victims and witnesses who are struggling with PTSD?
Well, the text talks about the importance of trauma-informed care, which recognizes that trauma can have a profound and lasting impact, and that healing requires a sensitive and compassionate approach.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
So it often involves therapy, medications, support groups, things like that.
Can you give me a quick overview of some of those therapeutic approaches?
Yeah, so one commonly used approach is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or TFCBT.
TFCBT, okay, and what does that involve?
So it helps individuals process their traumatic memories, challenge those negative thoughts and beliefs that have emerged as a result of the trauma, and develop coping skills for managing their emotions and reactions. process.
So it's about giving them the tools to manage those difficult emotions and regain a sense of control over their lives.
Exactly. And then there's EMDR,
Okay.
which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
EMDR. Okay. I've heard of that, but I'm not really familiar with it. How does that work?
It uses bilateral stimulation, like eye movements or tapping,
Okay.
to help people process traumatic memories.
So it's like rewiring the brain to reduce the emotional intensity of those traumatic memories.
That's the idea.
That's pretty cool. And what about support groups? How do those help?
Support groups can provide a safe space
Okay.
for people to share their experiences, connect with others who understand what they're going through, and just reduce that sense of isolation and shame.
So it's about building a community of support and understanding.
Exactly.
That's really important, especially when you're dealing with something as difficult as trauma. It's a reminder that you're not alone.
And it's important to emphasize that healing from trauma is a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
Different people heal at different paces.
Okay, so we've talked about the individual impact of crime and the support available for those struggling with trauma. Now I'm curious about the bigger picture. What are some of the psychological factors that contribute to crime and violence on a larger scale?
That's a great question, and the text explores a few different theories.
Okay.
One is social learning theory.
Okay, social learning theory. What's that all about?
So it suggests that criminal behavior is learned through observation, modeling, and reinforcement from important people in our lives.
So like family members, peers, even people we see in the media.
Exactly. Imagine a kid growing up in a home where violence is normal, where problems are solved through aggression, and criminal behavior is not really frowned upon.
Right, so they learn that those behaviors are acceptable, maybe even expected.
Exactly. And it's not just about family. Peer groups can be a huge influence, especially during adolescence.
Okay.
Think about a teenager whose friends are all involved in criminal activity. They're much more likely to get involved themselves.
It's like that pressure to conform, but with much higher stakes.
Right. And then there's strain theory.
Strain theory, what's that one about?
So this theory says that crime happens when people are blocked from achieving their goals through legitimate means.
So it's about that frustration and desperation they can build up when people feel like they have no other option.
Exactly. Imagine someone who wants to be financially successful, but they don't have access to good education, job training, stable employment. So they might resort to criminal activity like theft, drug dealing.
So they're taking a shortcut, a dangerous shortcut, because they feel like the system has failed them.
And it's not just about economic strain. It can also be about social status, recognition, a sense of belonging. If someone feels marginalized or powerless, they might be more likely to act out.
So it's a complex interplay of individual aspirations and societal barriers that can lead to criminal behavior.
Exactly. And then you have social disorganization theory.
Okay, another theory.
Which links crime to specific community characteristics.
Like what kind of characteristics?
Things like poverty, unemployment, residential instability, a breakdown of social norms.
So it's not just about the individuals, it's about the environment that breeds crime.
Right. Imagine a neighborhood. High poverty, high unemployment, abandoned buildings, a sense of hopelessness.
Right. So it's like a breeding ground for criminal activity.
And those theories can interact and overlap in all sorts of ways.
Makes sense. Human behavior is rarely influenced by just one factor. It's usually a combination of things.
Okay, so we've talked about some broad societal factors. Now I want to zoom in on the people on the front lines of law enforcement.
The police officers who put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe.
Exactly. And the text talks about the psychological toll that police work takes.
Yeah, I can imagine. They see a lot of trauma and have to make difficult decisions under pressure.
Right. They're constantly exposed to violence, tragedy, human suffering. They have to make split-second decisions in dangerous situations.
It's got to be tough to deal with that kind of stress and pressure day in and day out.
Yeah, and the text talks about the high rates of burnout, PTSD, even suicide among police officers.
Wow, that's really concerning. So what are some of the factors that contribute to those high rates of stress and trauma?
Well, like we've been saying, that Constant exposure to violence and tragedy
Yeah.
takes its toll.
Uh-huh.
And then they're often working long hours,
Okay.
dealing with shift work, facing danger and uncertainty every day.
Yeah.
And they might feel isolated.
Isolated. How so?
Well, their families and friends might not fully understand.
The demands of their job?
Right. It's not something you can easily relate to unless you've experienced it firsthand. So it's like they're carrying this heavy burden, both physically and emotionally.
And then on top of that,
Yeah.
they're often facing scrutiny and criticism from the public, especially with all the recent high-profile cases of police brutality.
Right. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
We need to support law enforcement,
Yeah.
but also hold them accountable and advocate for reforms.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between supporting those who protect us and demanding justice when those in power abuse their authority.
And the text also talks about this idea of de-escalation techniques.
De-escalation techniques, what are those?
So it's about teaching officers how to diffuse tense situations,
Okay.
communicate effectively, resolve conflicts without resorting to force.
So it's about giving them the tools to handle difficult situations without resorting to violence.
Exactly. Using force should always be a last resort. Okay, that makes sense. It's about finding peaceful solutions whenever possible. So we've talked about police work, the challenges they face, and the need for reforms. What's next?
So let's shift back to the courtroom and talk about the role of expert witnesses.
Expert witnesses.
Yeah.
They play a crucial role in the legal system, bringing their specialized knowledge to help judges and juries make sense of complex issues.
Right, they're that bridge
Yeah.
between specialized knowledge and the legal process.
So they can provide insights that the judge and jury might not have.
Exactly. Imagine a case involving like a complicated psychological disorder or disputed scientific technique.
Okay.
The judge and jury might not have the expertise to really evaluate the evidence.
Right. They need someone to explain it to them in a way they can understand.
Right, and that's where the expert witness comes in.
Okay.
They can offer their professional opinion based on their training, experience, research to help the court make those informed decisions.
Okay, so what are some areas where expert witnesses might be called upon?
All sorts of areas: mental health,
Okay.
forensic science, child custody evaluations, eyewitness testimony, economics, engineering. It really runs the gamut.
Wow. So it's a really diverse field drawing on expertise from many different disciplines.
And it's not just about presenting facts. It's about explaining things in a way that the court can understand, connecting those specialized concepts to the case.
So how do we know if someone is qualified to be an expert witness? What are the criteria?
So the text mentions three main criteria:
Okay.
qualifications, reliability, and relevance.
Can you break those down for me? I'm not really sure what those mean in this context.
Sure. Qualifications mean that the expert has the necessary education, training experience in their field to be considered an expert.
Gotcha.
And reliability means that their opinions are based on sound scientific principles, methods.
Right. So their work has to be credible, peer-reviewed, and accepted within the scientific community.
You got it.
Okay. And what about relevance?
Relevance means that their testimony has to be directly related to the legal issue at hand.
So they can't just come in and talk about anything they want. It has to be relevant to the specific case.
Exactly. And the text actually mentions something called the Daubert standard.
The Daubert standard. What's that?
It's a legal precedent that sets the bar for expert testimony. So under the Daubert standard, expert testimony has to be based on reliable scientific knowledge, stuff that's been peer-reviewed, tested, and generally accepted.
So it's about weeding out junk science or unproven theories.
Right. The court doesn't want to be misled.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the text also emphasizes the ethical considerations involved. Expert witnesses have this big responsibility because their opinions can have a huge impact on the legal outcome and people's lives.
Right, so they need to be objective and unbiased, and their testimony should be truthful and accurate.
Exactly. They're not there to advocate for one side or the other. They're there to assist the court.
Okay, so they're kind of like neutral advisors, helping the court to understand the evidence from a scientific perspective.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
And it brings us to our last topic for today.
All right, what is it?
The impact of media
on
crime and violence.
The media. That's a topic that always sparks debate, especially when it comes to violence. Does it desensitize us? Does it make us more aggressive? It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah, it's a really complex issue. There are strong opinions on both sides. So some people believe that violent media desensitizes us.
Okay.
Makes us more aggressive. Makes us more likely to commit violence. Others argue that it's just entertainment and there's no connection to real-world behavior.
So it's a nature versus nurture debate playing out in the media landscape.
Right, and the research findings are all over the place.
So there's no clear consensus on the impact of media on crime and violence.
It's complicated.
Yeah, I figured it wouldn't be simple. But the text explores some interesting theories about media effects, right?
It does, like desensitization, social cognitive theory.
Okay, let's start with desensitization. Can you remind me what that's all about?
So desensitization is this idea that when we're repeatedly exposed to violence in the media, it makes us less sensitive to the real-world consequences of violence.
So it's like we become numb to it.
Yeah, like it doesn't shock us.
Yeah.
It doesn't disturb us as much as it would have before.
And we might even start to see violence as more normal or acceptable.
Exactly.
That's a scary thought.
And then social cognitive theory suggests that we learn by observing and imitating the behaviors we see in the media.
So if we see a hero using violence to save the day, we might be more likely to use violence ourselves.
It's possible, especially if we identify with that character or admire them. And it's not just about violence. It can also be about attitudes and beliefs.
So if we're constantly exposed to media that reinforces negative stereotypes, we might be more likely to believe those stereotypes and act on them in real life.
Exactly. Media can be really powerful.
It's like a double-edged sword. It can be a force for good or for bad, depending on how it's used. So what can we do about it?
Well, the text emphasizes the importance of media literacy, which is basically teaching people to think critically about media, understand its impact.
So it's about being aware of the messages we're consuming and not just passively absorbing everything we see and hear.
Exactly. Question what you see, consider multiple perspectives.
It's about being an active and informed consumer of media, right? Making conscious choices about what we watch, read, and listen to.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive.
Already. Wow, time flies when you're having fun.
I know. It's been a long journey, but I hope it's been an interesting one.
It definitely has. I've learned so much about criminal psychology, from the biological and psychological factors that contribute to crime, to the complexities of forensic assessment and the challenges of treating offenders. It's a fascinating field.
And it's a field that's constantly evolving as we learn more about the human mind.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's all about understanding human behavior, both the good and the bad.
And that understanding can help us create a safer, more just, and more compassionate world.
I like that.
So if you're interested in learning more about criminal psychology,
what are some good resources for folks who want to explore this topic further?
There are tons of books, articles, documentaries out there, and we'll be sure to share some recommendations in the show notes.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.